Have you ever felt invisible in the moments that mattered most? When the people you expected to show up for you chose someone else, leaving you to walk alone through your own victories and heartbreaks? This story is for you. It started with the soft click of my phone screen lighting up, a call from my mother, 2 nights before graduation. I already knew what the conversation would be before I answered. There was a certain choreography to disappointment in our house. It always came with the rustle of excuses and a voice too soft to be sincere. "Sweetheart," she said, that performative sigh of guilt slipping through the syllables like fabric through fingers. "We've been looking at the schedule and, well, your sister's winter recital got moved. It's the same night as your graduation." The pause was designed to let me react with understanding. That was the trick. If I interrupted with anger, I was being difficult. If I went silent, I was making them feel worse. Either way, I became the problem for noticing. "She's still young, darling," she continued. "There'll be more graduations for you." I stood in the tiny laundry room of my off-campus apartment, bare feet cold against cracked tile, my dress for the ceremony still draped on the back of the door like hope waiting to be zipped up. The walls around me were thin, yellowed, and humming with the voice of someone else's TV next door. But in that moment, I could hear nothing but the slow press of silence building between us. "There won't be," I said, voice flat. This was my only one. Silence. And then, as if that made it better, "You know we're proud of you, right?" Pride without presence is like a birthday card without a signature. It says nothing. It means less. I said nothing back. I didn't have to. She filled the silence with something about recording the recital and how my sister had been practicing so hard, and how they wished they could clone themselves. I hung up before the word clone could turn into another apology wrapped in fiction. That night, I stood in the mirror and practiced smiling like I was okay. Not the whole smile, just the version that passed when people asked how I was doing. I pinched my cheeks until they pinked up, powdered under my eyes, and tried not to look at the chair beside mine in the reflection, because I already knew it would be empty. On graduation day, the sun was so aggressively bright, it felt like a spotlight cast by someone who hadn't read the script. The crowd of families filled the outdoor rows with helium balloons, neon signs, floral garlands looped over folding chairs. Fathers clutched camcorders like relics. Mothers dabbed their eyes like they'd won something. And me? I walked alone through the lineup, robe cinched too tight, tassel brushing my cheek like a whisper I couldn't answer. When they called my name, I walked across the stage like my shoes were borrowed. I didn't look up. I didn't scan the crowd. I'd done that once already, right before we started, and all I saw was a sea of cheers that didn't belong to me. My seat had been flanked on both sides by strangers, and on the one that should have held their faces, an empty white plastic chair with a program folded neatly on it. I stared at it for a long time, long enough to memorize the shadows creasing it down the middle, the slight smudge from someone else's thumb, the way it sat like an apology no one handed me. After the ceremony, everyone scattered like bright confetti. I watched one girl burst into tears in her father's arms. Another boy lifted his diploma in triumph while his family whooped behind him. A grandmother stood on her tiptoes to kiss someone's forehead. And I stood near a vending machine in the back hallway, drinking flat soda, tongue pressed against the roof of my mouth to keep the trembling in my jaw from spreading. No one noticed. I looked down at the shoes I was wearing, sensible nude pumps, the kind my mother liked. I could still hear her voice from the dressing room weeks ago. "They make you look mature, like someone who's going places." I'd nodded then, even though I hated how they pinched. It was a strange kind of grief, the grief of being invisible. No funeral, no wound to point to, just a persistent ache that says, you were here, you did the thing, and no one looked up. I rode the bus home in silence, robe folded over my lap, diploma tucked under one arm like a secret I didn't trust anyone to hold. The driver didn't ask why my mascara was smudged. I didn't volunteer it. It was easier that way. Grief isn't always a scream. It's often a polite nod and a quiet seat by the window. That night, I hung my dress back in the closet. I didn't cry into it. That would have made it sacred, and it wasn't. It was just another costume I wore to please people who didn't bother showing up for the final act. I stared at it for a long time, wondering if I'd ever be able to wear it again without tasting this day in the hem. I thought about calling them, just to say something. I wasn't even sure what. But then I imagined the conversation, the apologies, the justifications, the part where I'm made to feel dramatic for caring, the part where they say, "We wish we could have been there," and I say, "I know," even though I didn't. I turned off my phone instead, turned off the light, laid in bed and stared at the ceiling until it blurred. I wondered if my sister remembered to thank them in her recital speech. I wondered if they clapped. I didn't sleep that night, not really. Just drifted in and out of that heavy underwater fog where your heart keeps repeating things your brain has already given up on fixing. When the sun rose again, I got up, made coffee, and stood at the window. I watched a man walk his dog, a neighbor hosing down his car, a couple jogging in sync. The world kept moving, and I made a quiet vow, poured like ink inside myself. They may have missed this one, but I wouldn't give them another. That was the last time I wore a dress they bought me. I bought the ticket on a Monday morning, when the coffee grounds were still stuck in the filter from the night before and the air in my apartment tasted like sleep and missed chances. I hadn't brushed my hair. I hadn't even looked in a mirror. I just sat there in yesterday's hoodie, my diploma still leaning against the wall like it was embarrassed to be seen, and typed into the flight search bar, one way, any continent, no layovers, cheap. Estonia came up. I clicked it. I didn't know much about the country, just that it had coastlines, quiet forests, and a time zone far enough to make excuses impossible. More importantly, I knew no one there, and no one in my family could point to it on a map without guessing. That felt right. I paid in cash. No paper trail, no "are you sure" confirmation pop-up. Just the quiet whir of the printer spitting out my ticket like a dare I finally accepted. I didn't pack carefully. I didn't cry. I didn't even tell anyone. Not friends, not coworkers, not the boy I'd been ghosting who still sent me "you up" at 2:11 a.m. I left a few things on purpose. The curling iron my mother bought, the journal with her inscription inside the cover, a pair of shoes my sister said made me look taller but not intimidating. Let them keep the parts of me they preferred. The duffel I took was rust-colored and ugly, the zipper temperamental and loud. It used to belong to my dad. He once took it on a fishing trip and forgot it in the car for 3 days. It still smelled faintly of river mud and regret. I stuffed it with only what I could carry without consequence. 3 sweaters, 2 notebooks, my passport, and a book of poetry with underlined phrases I didn't fully understand, but felt eply anyway. At 4:03 a.m., I left for the airport. The ride there was uneventful, just a stranger's car, rain tapping gently against the window, and the faint hum of a jazz station playing for an audience that had long since stopped listening. I kept my eyes on the road signs, watching familiar names flicker by and disappear, each exit a place I would not be returning to. I didn't cry. I didn't make a playlist to match the mood. I didn't perform grief for the rearview mirror. There was no dramatic airport goodbye, no gate announcement that made me choke up. Just the smell of overpriced cinnamon buns and the cold metal of the boarding pass against my palm. No one stopped me. No one asked why I was traveling alone. It turns out, when you look calm and well-dressed, people assume you're doing something admirable, not disappearing. The flight was long. 8 hours in a metal tube with strangers' elbows and recycled air. I stared out the window, watching clouds like torn sheets smear across the sky. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I closed my eyes and imagined what they were doing back home. Probably watching her recital video on repeat. Probably not noticing the silence I'd left behind. When we landed, it was gray and windless. Estonia greeted me with the smell of sea salt, diesel, and distant wood smoke, like a story you couldn't quite place but felt sure you'd heard before. I stepped into the airport, and no one was waiting. Good. I found a coffee shop near the harbor and dismantled my phone with deliberate care, battery, SIM, even the protective case. I dropped the pieces in different bins, the body in one, the battery in another, and the SIM card slipped between the pages of a take one leave one book that smelled like mold and memory. Let someone else find it. Let them try to piece together someone who no longer existed. The city was a blur of cobbled streets and old bricks worn smooth by centuries of feet and forgetting. I liked that. I liked being among ghosts that didn't ask questions. I found a room above a bookstore on a street where the trees leaned forward like they were listening. The landlady, Marika, wore headscarves wrapped tightly and spoke with a cadence that felt like it came from a war I hadn't read about. She took one look at me, eyes narrowing slightly, and said, "No drugs, no noise, no guests unless they're polite." I nodded. She gave me the key. My room was small but clean. White curtains, a twin bed, a desk facing the alley. There was a small heater that clanked when it started and stopped like it was remembering something painful. I unpacked slowly, not to settle, just to exhale. The first night, I wandered into the bookstore beneath. The bell above the door let out a soft chime that sounded like it had forgotten how to be loud. The place smelled of cinnamon tea, ink, and old ambition. I ran my fingers along the spines, not reading the titles, just feeling them, like braille for a life I hadn't earned yet. A woman asked me, in clipped English, what brought me here. I paused, then smiled in that rehearsed, sweet way I'd learned to weaponize. "Thesis research," I said. "Linguistic displacement, just a short residency." She nodded politely. Didn't push. Later in my room, I whispered the words to myself like a prayer. Displaced, not broken. It became my new name. But I didn't sleep easily. Around midnight, I heard someone downstairs mention the word sister. I flinched. The kind of flinch that isn't muscle, but marrow. I sat up in bed, heart pounding like it had remembered something I'd begged it to forget. I pressed a hand against my ribs, tried to slow the tide. I told myself it was just a word, but memory isn't logical. It's landmine-coded. I thought of the birthday when my sister sang and everyone forgot to cut the cake I baked. The time I cried in the bathroom because she got a medal for participation while I got a lecture for second place. These things are small, right? That's the lie they feed you. The lie that says wounds require violence to be real. But I've learned, neglect carves deeper than cruelty ever could. It makes you doubt your own hunger for attention. It makes you swallow it like guilt. I pulled the blanket up to my chin, listened to the bookstore's old radiator breathe through the wall. The silence here was different than back home. It didn't press against me like an accusation. It didn't feel like absence. It felt honest. It made no promises. It didn't pretend. And for the first time in years, I could breathe without performing. But I didn't feel free yet, just gone. And sometimes, that was enough. In Estonia, the sea didn't crash. It whispered. Even the wind there had restraint, brushing the coastline like it was remembering something too painful to shout. I used to stand on the harbor's edge in the early mornings, wrapped in a thrifted coat and the kind of silence that doesn't demand company, and let the wind braid itself through my hair as I tried to remember who I was without them. But memories don't dissolve just because you change the scenery. They resurface like bruises under winter skin, quiet, purple truths you forgot you were hiding. She was the melody. I was the metronome, steady, unnoticed, necessary. That was always the dynamic, even in childhood. She filled the rooms with light, even when it flickered and bent sideways. And I was the one closing the windows to keep the draft out. I don't think she meant to erase me. Most golden children don't. It happens naturally. You shine so bright that people stop noticing the shadows, but someone still lives in them. When I was 11, I won a regional debate tournament. First place. Trophy taller than my forearm, certificate signed in real ink, not just photocopied pride. I remember bursting through the door, cheeks flushed with joy, hair disheveled from the stage lights, breath coming fast because I ran home to tell them first. My mother barely looked up. She was hunched over the ironing board, steam fogging her glasses as she smoothed out the pink tulle folds of my sister's ballet costume. "Sweetheart, that's great," she said, eyes on the iron. "Do you mind helping me find her other slipper? We're already running late." And just like that, my moment folded itself in half. I didn't cry. I just nodded, set the trophy down on the counter where it would collect fingerprints and dust, and crawled beneath the couch cushions in search of the shoe. That was the night I learned celebration is a performance, and not very one gets cast. Earlier than that, I remember kindergarten. My sister had just turned 4 and was learning her ABCs. Every time she got through them without error, they clapped like she'd cracked a secret code. I, on the other hand, brought home a spelling worksheet with a small red B+ circled at the top. My father held it up and frowned. Why not an A? It wasn't angry, just expectant. Like excellence was my baseline, and anything else a malfunction. She was praised for progress. I was scolded for imperfection. You start to internalize it, the math of worthiness. You learn that applause is conditional, and silence is your inheritance. Eventually, you stop auditioning for love that keeps changing its rubric. People always assume the forgotten child is sad, that we weep in corners and write in secret journals, and sometimes we do. But more often, we become efficient. We overperform. We read the room before we speak. We laugh at jokes not made for us. We master the choreography of not taking up too much space. I was that child. The one who reminded the teacher about assignments, who stayed quiet in group work because everyone was tired of being corrected, who held the camera at her sister's piano recitals and remembered to Zoom, who learned how to ask for things in ways that wouldn't sound like asking. I used to believe this made me strong, and maybe it did, but strength born from erasure doesn't empower, it armors, and armor gets heavy when no one offers to help you carry it. Even in photos, I was always a step behind, framed slightly to the left, the one holding the umbrella, not dancing in the rain. She wasn't cruel, my sister. She shared her gum, let me borrow her glitter pens, hugged me in front of her friends even when it wasn't cool. She didn't step on me to rise. She simply rose, and they never thought to ask what was beneath her ladder. I didn't hate her. I hated how easy it was for them to love her out loud. That realization came like a burn, slow at first, then suddenly blistering. I remember walking past a piano store in Tallinn one evening, the kind with soft gold lighting and polished keys visible through the glass. A girl inside, no older than 10, played something clumsy but heartfelt. Her parents clapped when she finished, the kind of clap that fills a room with warmth. I stood outside, hand pressed against the cold window, and it hit me. I had spent my whole life building competence like scaffolding, hoping one day they'd look up. They never did. That was the moment I knew my exile wasn't about escape. It was about authorship. I didn't leave to disappear. I left so I could rewrite myself without the edits they kept making in red pen. I went home that night and lit every candle I had. The room flickered with soft amber light, shadows dancing along the bookshelf, and I wrote my real name for the first time in weeks. Not the alias I gave to the bookstore clerk, not the lie I fed strangers, my name, mine. It didn't feel like returning. It felt like reclaiming. Because erasure isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a question that never gets answered, a hand not held, a room not entered. But just because they wrote me into the background doesn't mean I have to stay there. I used to think I was the support beam, the one who held the ceiling up while the others painted murals. But now I know. I was the pen. I was the quiet ink, and they just never learned how to read me. Somewhere between silence and spotlight is where I live now. And for once, I'm not asking to be seen. I'm demanding it. It was a Wednesday, rainy, pale, and forgettable, when I opened Instagram and saw my sister's face framed in the soft lighting of a sunset she hadn't earned. I hadn't been following her, not really. But the algorithm, that invisible voyeur, knew the shape of my ghosts. It offered her to me like a temptation or a joke. The reel began with her walking slowly down a tree-lined path, oversized cardigan swaying behind her like a cape of healing. Piano music played faintly in the background, the kind designed to make grief sound poetic. Text faded in, my healing journey after sibling estrangement. I stared. My thumb hovered but didn't scroll, The video was a curated mosaic of melancholy, shots of her staring out windows, sipping tea she probably let go cold for aesthetics' sake, arranging dried flowers in glass vases, and once holding a childhood photo of the two of us. I recognized it immediately. It had lived on our hallway wall for years. She must have taken it after I left. The caption beneath the video read, "Sometimes love becomes distance, but growth begins where pain ends. We were close once, until we weren't." I won't share details, but sometimes people grow apart, and that's okay. I wish her healing too. There it was. My erasure, again, this time dressed in beige tones and branded vulnerability. She didn't mention why I left, didn't mention the missed graduation, didn't mention the call where I was told her recital mattered more, didn't mention the years of being useful but never cherished. Just unresolved tension. As if my departure were a mutual decision instead of a necessary extraction. I felt something cold coil in my chest. Not rage exactly. Rage is too alive, too primal. This was cleaner, sharper, a blade left on ice. I bled quietly. She branded it. I imagined her rehearsing that video, adjusting the lighting, picking the filter, timing her sighs so they wouldn't seem performed. Maybe she even cried during filming, tears for an audience, not a sister. It wasn't the grief that got to me. It was the polish. When I hurt, I vanished. When she hurt, she posted. I set the phone down carefully, like it might explode. My fingers were trembling, not from sadness, but from restraint. The restraint of not calling her, not writing a comment, not reminding the world that there are two sides to every elegy. She always knew how to make pain photogenic. The storm outside had begun to thicken, fat drops of rain sliding down the window in lazy, indifferent streaks. Tallinn was quiet, its streets emptying like a breath held too long. I watched the cobblestones blur behind the glass and wondered if there was a word for what I felt, something between betrayal and amusement. She had turned my silence into content. And just when I thought I couldn't be surprised anymore, I checked my email. The subject line read, "Still proud," from my father, 2 words that landed like a stone in still water. I hesitated before opening it, already bracing for the flat, familiar ache. "Hope you're doing okay. Let us know if you ever want to come home." That was it. No apology, no reference to what they had missed. Just a vague offering tossed like breadcrumbs to a bird they weren't sure would return. Still proud. Proud of what? That I survived without them? That I didn't implode? That I disappeared politely, without demanding an audience or a spotlight? I stared at the message for 3 hours. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just let it sit there, like a test I had already failed. They wanted me to come home, but only if I stayed quiet. Only if I resumed the role I was born into, the one who bends, the one who makes space, the one who forgives first. But I had changed. I had built walls they didn't have the blueprints for. Still proud. What an efficient phrase. All the warmth of affection, none of the accountability. They never asked why I left. They just watched my absence like weather. Unfortunate, but not their fault. And now, with my sister's curated grief spreading across timelines like it was earned, and my father's carefully neutral email waiting like a trap, I realized something I hadn't let myself say aloud. They don't miss me. They miss the version of me that didn't ask to be seen. The version that clapped for her, fetched the forgotten slipper, stayed home from her own celebration to cheer from the hallway. That girl is dead. I deleted the email, not because I was angry, but because I was done performing grief for people who called it drama. The room felt colder then, as if my silence had weight and shape. I curled up in the window seat, listening to the rain slide down the roof, and whispered something into the stillness that I hadn't dared say until then. I don't want to come home. Because home was a place that loved me conditionally, a stage where I played supporting roles in a play I wasn't allowed to rewrite. Distance kept them from touching me, but not from echoing inside me. An echo is its own kind of haunting. especially when it sounds like your name said too late. That night, I lit a candle and watched the wax pool around the wick like it was remembering something it could no longer hold. I didn't post about it, didn't frame it as healing. I let it be private, mine. No hashtags, no music, no audience, just the quiet ownership of a scar that no one applauded. But I carried it all the same. I booked the flight without flinching. One way. Again. No return date, no forwarding address, no illusion of reconciliation. This wasn't a homecoming. This was a reckoning. I stared at the confirmation email like it was a prophecy sealed in pixels. My reflection in the laptop screen looked colder than I remembered, sharper somehow, like the months had carved me into something less forgiving, more deliberate. I wasn't going back for closure. I didn't believe in that anymore. Closure is the lie we tell ourselves when we're too tired to demand justice. This wasn't about closure. This was about presence. I had learned the cruel math of absence. I had felt its weight in an empty graduation chair. I had watched my name become a footnote in someone else's storyline. So now, I'd become the headline. I arrived on a Thursday, late morning. The sky was that muted, overcast gray that makes everything look like a stage lit for tragedy. My coat was black, my lips were red, my heartbeat was steady. I didn't text, I didn't say, ahead. I just stood on the front porch of the house that raised me, suitcase in hand, and knocked once. The door opened too slowly. My mother stood in the doorway in a slate blue sweater set and that brittle expression she wore whenever something didn't fit into her curated vision of grace. Her eyes took me in with a flicker of surprise that she quickly flattened into politeness. "You could have called," she said, voice clipped but airy, like a woman trying not to wrinkle a silk napkin. I met her gaze evenly. "You could have attended." Her mouth twitched. She opened the door wider. Didn't move aside to let me in, just stepped back as though the air between us could carry me through. Inside, the house smelled the same. Lemons, polished wood, memory. But something in the walls felt hollow, like the pictures weren't watching anymore. My father stood in the hallway like a ghost who wasn't sure if he was allowed to speak. His hair had grayed more than I remembered, and his cardigan hung off him like it didn't trust him either. He said my name, just once, softly. I didn't respond. He didn't try again. My suitcase wheels hummed against the floorboards like a ticking clock. I didn't ask where my room was. I already knew it would have been converted, a study maybe, or an exercise space they never used. "Your sister's at rehearsal," my mother said after a beat, as if the silence needed narrative. "Perfect," I said. And it was. Because I didn't come to confront her. I came to let her see me and wonder when the other shoe would drop. I didn't unpack. I laid the suitcase against the wall like a threat. I walked into the living room and surveyed it like I was visiting a museum that once held something sacred. The photos hadn't changed. Still the same frames. Still her face in every other one. My presence surgically minimized, cropped, blurred, backgrounded. One image stood out. Us at the beach. She was 5, I was 10, she had ice cream on her chin. I was holding a towel, blocking the wind. That's how they captured me, always mid-service. I stared at the picture until my mother asked if I wanted tea. No. I wasn't there to sip anything. I sat on the edge of the couch. She sat in the armchair like a judge at a parole hearing. My father hovered by the hallway like a witness too scared to testify. "It's been nearly a year," she said. "We weren't sure if—" I cut her off with silence. Not a sharp one. A deliberate one. The kind that says, "You no longer have the right to name my absence." My phone vibrated once in my coat pocket. I didn't look. I already knew who it was. She'd seen me tagged. Someone always tags. Good. Let her sweat. Let her wonder if I came to destroy or to forgive. Let her imagine what I might say if given the mic. Let her question what parts of the story I still own. I stood up. I walked to the hallway. "I'll be gone by morning," I said. Just needed to leave something behind. I watched their eyes flicker. Hope? Confusion? Fear? I didn't care. Because this time, they were the ones holding their breath. And I was the silence that chose not to fill the space. The seat I left empty this time wasn't mine. It was theirs. And tomorrow, they'd have to sit with it. I dressed like a wound, a slow-bleeding, deliberate kind. The kind that stains silk and memory. Black turtleneck, seal, lean as grief. Red lipstick is like a gash across my mouth. Hair pulled back so tightly my scalp ached, so every nerve would stay alert. I didn't want softness that night. No illusions of warmth or forgiveness. I wanted to look like everything she had turned me into, and everything she had feared I might become. The conservatory stood like a mausoleum of sound, old stone and ambition echoing through marble arches and velvet-curtained doors. The chandeliers glittered overhead like frozen tears. I walked through the lobby with heels clicking like metronomes, measuring not time, but vengeance. The air was thick with perfume and pride, the kind of cloying confidence that came from families who had never had to choose survival over dignity. I was an aberration here, and yet I walked like I belonged more than anyone else. No one recognized me. Not yet. I was no longer the shy shadow clinging to the edge of recitals, hiding behind my sister's spotlight, swallowing my applause in silence. I had erased that girl, buried her. Tonight, I came to haunt. The usher offered me a program. I didn't take it. Inside, I stood. I didn't need a seat. I didn't come to sit still. My eyes scanned the theater, the red seats filled with faces that would soon melt into insignificance. All but one. The stage was still dark, the orchestra hadn't begun, but I could already feel her presence bleeding from behind the velvet curtain. She was near, and she didn't know I was closer. She had always needed an audience. Applause fed her more than food ever did. My sister danced to be seen, to be adored, and I had come to be the ghost in the crowd, silent, staring, then gone. As the lights dimmed and the music rose, I moved to the shadows at the back of the theater. The velvet lining of the walls absorbed the orchestra's opening notes like secrets. The ballerinas took the stage, swan-like in their perfection. Every movement curved with hunger, for beauty, for admiration. I watched, but I didn't really see. I was waiting for her. Then, halfway through the second act, she emerged. A solo. All eyes tilted toward her like flowers to the sun. Her lines were sharp, fluid. Her face calm. Too calm. It was the mask she had perfected over the years, a porcelain thing with no cracks. But I knew where they were. I had lived inside them. My body was still, but my heart was an iron thing, heating in my chest. Watching her was like watching a theft reenacted in slow motion. Every pirouette stole something from me. Every grand jeté was a memory thrown back in my face. Her movements were a map of everything I had been denied. I didn't stay to see her finish. Mid-intermission, the lobby spilled with murmurs and champagne. That's when it happened. I saw her sister before she saw me. Her laughter peeled like silver from her lips, effortless, the kind that made people feel lucky to be near. She was surrounded by well-dressed vultures with inherited names. She tilted her head, some joke on her tongue, her fingers curled around a flute of sparkling praise, then her gaze met mine. It was surgical. Her face froze mid-laugh, and I, God forgive me, smiled. I raised my glass, not in toast, but in farewell. Then I turned, and I left. I didn't look back. Not once. The night air hit me like absolution, cold, honest. For a moment it stripped everything away, the layers of art, iffies, the mask of confidence, even the steel I'd forced into my spine. I stood outside the conservatory, heels rooted in wet pavement, heart still rattling from the storm I had become. I hadn't come to stay. I hadn't come to talk, to confront, to reclaim. I had come so she would see me, and then wonder why I disappeared. Let her spend the second half of the performance searching the crowd, trying to dance through the weight of absence. Let her wonder if the silence in the third row was mine, Let her wonder if I had come to forgive or to judge. Let her feel the seat I left empty, the ghost of me lingering in the echo of her applause. She would wonder for days, maybe weeks, maybe longer. She would replay the moment in her mind like a scratched record, my face, my smile, the wine in my hand. She would analyze it, dissect it, search it for meaning. Because control is not just about presence. Sometimes power is in the exit. Years ago, when everything still shimmered with possibility, I had once told her I wanted to be a dancer too. We were 12. I had tried to mimic her steps in the hallway mirror, arms stiff, legs unsure. She had laughed, not kindly, just enough to wilt me. She told me I was too heavy, too clumsy, too slow. She told me I didn't have the line, and that was the first time I had felt my bones shrink to fit the outline of someone else's brilliance. But I had grown since then, not in size perhaps, but in edges. She took the stage, I took the story. She danced for the crowd, I danced in her head. She had always demanded that I watch her, applaud her, orbit her. But now, she would feel the vacuum of me, the refusal. There is a peculiar power in not needing to be seen anymore. I vanished into the city like smoke, leaving no trace, only scent. But I know her, and I know this. She will look for me. She will wonder what I wanted, why I came, what I meant. And she will never know that the answer is simple. I didn't come to forgive. I came so she would need to be forgiven, but I didn't stay long enough to offer it. That night, I wasn't her sister. I was her consequence. And consequences don't beg. They arrive. They vanish. And they haunt. The house was still. That kind of stillness that only settles after a long war. The kind where the ruins are cleaned up, but the air still carries ash. Light filtered through the living room blinds in long golden slats, painting stripes across the floor like prison bars. I stood at the threshold with the precision of a soldier returning to the battlefield, not to fight, but to leave a final mark on the soil. I had given this house so many versions of myself. The quiet girl with bent knees and bitten lips, the daughter who watered silence like a dying plant, hoping it would bloom into affection, the sister who dimmed so another could shine without shadows. But this was my last visit, and I had come with offerings, not apologies. I moved quietly, deliberately, the kind of quiet that comes from knowing there's nothing left to prove. The framing, Ed photo was the first thing I placed. My graduation portrait, matte black frame, no dust. I had chosen a shot where my eyes looked straight into the lens, unflinching, not smiling, just steady. For years, I'd been told to soften, to make myself more palatable, more polite, more palely pretty. But in this photo, I was the inverse of their expectations. I looked like someone who had survived something you wouldn't understand unless you'd tried to scream with your mouth sewn shut. I placed it on the hallway table, right under the mirror where my mother used to fix my sister's collar before recitals. The same mirror I had been told to move away from. Don't crowd her reflection. Now, the glass held only me. That felt like symmetry. Then came the letter. Just 10 words. I folded the paper twice, clean and sharp, and placed it beside the frame. You chose her music. I became my own silence. No salutation, no signature. I didn't need to remind them who I was. They knew. Or maybe now, finally, they'd begin to understand. I didn't write more because more would be mercy, and I was done gifting them that. Last came the key. The one they'd given me years ago, with a casualness that felt like obligation rather than invitation. A spare, they called it. As if I had always been the extra. I laid it gently on the wood beside the letter. It was cold in my palm, like old metal always is, unfeeling, unbending. And in that coldness, I found peace. The key wasn't a token anymore. It was a refusal. An ending shaped like an exit. They wouldn't find me here again. That night, I packed the last of my life into a single suitcase. I left the walls bare, except for one pinned note above my desk. Half poem, half promise. The world didn't break me. It built me backwards. So I learned to walk through fire with my face still. I watched the sunrise from the airport window. The glass was warm with condensation, the sky painted in oranges and pale purples like bruises healing. The air smelled of jet fuel and new chances. I didn't cry. I hadn't in months. Grief had hardened into something more precise, like ink, like authorship. When they called my boarding group, I didn't hesitate. I walked forward like someone who'd burned her maps and memorized the stars. Tokyo was waiting. A new city, loud and unknown, glittering with anonymity. I was going there not to disappear, but to finally appear on my own terms. The publisher had emailed me months ago. They were looking for scar writers, not just voices, but wounds with pens. I hadn't replied immediately. I wasn't sure at the time if I was ready to let my pain become currency. But in the weeks that followed, I realized something vital. I wasn't selling my scars. I was owning them, naming them, turning them into language instead of lineage. I wasn't running anymore. I was choosing. That's the difference. Once, I had wanted to be chosen so badly, by her, by them. I thought love was something to be earned through silence and service. I thought loyalty meant shrinking until I fit into their frames. But now I know better. Choosing myself was not betrayal. It was evolution. There's a kind of authorship that comes when you stop begging for recognition. When you no longer ache to be understood, you become the narrator. You write the ending. And my ending started with a plane ticket. As I fastened my seatbelt, I glanced at the city shrinking beneath me. The rivers that once felt like escape routes now looked like threads tying stories I'd outgrown. Somewhere below, she might be waking up, reading that letter. She might still be in costume, still wearing applause like perfume. Maybe she'll call me, maybe she'll rage, maybe she'll cry. But I won't answer. Because the silence I became, it isn't emptiness, it's authorship, it's mine. And it doesn't echo back. The first time she tagged me in a post, I stared at it for 22 minutes. No likes, no comments, just the familiar blur of our younger selves in summer light, our arms linked, our faces sweaty with laughter. The caption was as soft and sharp as a memory. Some things never change. Miss you. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a conversation. It was nostalgia dressed as tenderness. A velvet glove over the same cold hand. I didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. I let it sit there, quietly, like a souvenir in someone else's museum. That's what the past feels like now. Not a wound, not even a warning, just a gallery I no longer walk through. She posted more over time. Birthday flashbacks, throwback Thursdays, a few blurred snaps of childhood art projects, dance costumes, crooked smiles that never made it to the recital programs. Always with those soft captions. Where did time go? Or, she always wrote the best cards. She didn't know I saw them. She didn't know I watched. Not often, just enough to stay human. Our mother sends Christmas e-cards now. Digital snowflakes drifting across a stock photo fireplace. Her messages are clinical in their cheer, too polished, as if they were written for a newsletter subscriber rather than a daughter. The subject lines always bloom with forced warmth. Thinking of you this season, or home is still here if you want it. She never mentioned the letter, never asked about Tokyo, never said the word sorry. But I understand now, some people confuse silence with peace, and others dress absence in kindness and expect it to be enough. What they don't know is I kept the door open. I never locked it. I never burned it to ash or boarded it shut. But I also never stepped through it again. There's power in choosing not to return. Tokyo became a kind of mirror, one that didn't reflect who I was supposed to be, only who I truly was. The noise, the motion, the blur of neon dreams and midnight trains, it wrapped around me like ink. I started to write louder. I let my sentences run wild. My metaphors cracked like bone. I wrote scars into stories and pain into poetry. My editors didn't ask me to soften. They didn't tell me to write like someone unbroken. They said, "We want your damage raw. We want the ugly truth dressed beautifully," and I gave them everything. On the quiet nights, though, when the city rested and the traffic hummed like distant waves, I still heard it. The recital I never saw. The one I walked out of before her final bow. I imagine her spinning across the stage, smile frozen, eyes searching the crowd. I wonder if she faltered. I wonder if she danced harder, trying to chase the ghost I left behind. And the graduation they missed. My speech, my trembling hands clutching a borrowed microphone, the auditorium echoing with names that didn't include theirs. I remember glancing to the back row, pretending they were late, pretending they cared. 2 songs. One chosen, one forgotten. That used to devastate me. But now? Now, mine plays louder. It plays in the way I take up space in interviews, in the way my name is printed on spines and passed between trembling fingers in late-night bookstores. It plays in how readers write to say, "I thought I was alone until I read this." It plays in the voice I finally claimed, the one that doesn't wait for permission. I didn't burn the past. I didn't throw my childhood into flames and dance on the ashes. I left the door cracked, the light on, but I also built something else, a place that didn't require forgiveness as currency, a home where I didn't have to audition for affection. They still don't know where I live. They never asked. I don't think they want to know. Not really. Wanting me would mean confronting who they made me. And that version of me, the one that writes, speaks, refuses to shrink, doesn't fit their family photos. I'm not a caption. I'm a chapter they never read because it didn't come with applause. And yet, I carry no rage, not anymore. Just clarity. They chose her music. I became my own silence. But silence is not absence, not when it's chosen, not when it sings. Now, it sings in my kitchen when I cook for one and dance barefoot in cracked tile light. It sings when I fall asleep with books in my lap and no one's judgment in the walls. It sings when I wake up before dawn and walk the streets alone, the city mine in its hush. And sometimes, yes, there's a hush that tastes like loneliness. But it's mine. And I'd rather live alone in truth than together in fiction. So no, I didn't burn it. I didn't scream or shatter the door. I left it open enough to let the wind through. But I never crossed it again. Because home isn't a place that forgets you when you shine alone. And I shine louder now. Not in spite. But because I stopped waiting for someone else to light me up. What if the freedom you seek isn't about running away, but choosing to write your own story? Loud, unapologetic, and true. This journey teaches us that true empowerment comes from reclaiming our voice, even when the world tries to rewrite our worth. So tell me, when have you felt unseen? And how did you find the courage to be your own author? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that remind us all to shine on our own terms.